Recently I've been thinking about how graffiti and street art can be read as a barometer for the city, especially in times of widespread political upheaval or sickness. The walls tell the tale of the common folk. So today I'm going to examine that using the computer game Dishonored.
Come here in my life.
I should mention there's probably minor spoilers in this video, but it was for a game that was brought out in 2012. Because I'm only going to be focusing on the first Dishonored, not Dishonored 2 or any of the DLC. So if you haven't played it and you want to, go play it now, and I'll be here when you come back.
Okay, first a little background on the story. You play as Corvo, the Royal Protector, who is coming back to Dunwall after a few months away on a mission given to you by your boss, the Empress Jessamine, to seek help for a plague killing her people. Within minutes of the start of the game, you watch on in horror as the Empress is assassinated and her daughter Emily is kidnapped. You are blamed for the deed and start the game proper, locked in Dunwall's prison, awaiting execution. As you play, you also discover the occult underbelly of the city and occasionally find yourself whirled into the void, a magical otherworld with a sole inhabitant, the heretical outsider. He grants you magical powers which help you on your trail of revenge while you slowly take down everyone and attempt to replace the young Emily onto her rightful throne.
Because your journey is focused on the upper echelons of Dunwall society, you never really encounter a lot of the Dunwall citizens. A lot of them have already died from the plague, or they've been rounded up and sent to the flooded district. But you can see echoes of them in the empty apartments you search, in the journals and the letters that they've written, and the graffiti they've left behind. There are a number of themes to the graffiti in Dishonored, and each one shows what the citizens are concerned with and how their lives are being affected by the struggle for power up the top.
First and foremost, they are worried about the plague being spread by rats throughout the city. There is no cure and the citizenry are dying in the streets. As the plague progresses through a victim, blood tears start to leak from their eyes and they lose all sense of who they were, essentially becoming mindless killing machines akin to zombies. One of the most common pieces of the graph in the game references this transition.
Next there is the political discord and the resulting chaos in the city.
A friendly character, Samuel the boatman, even says, "Big changes make me uneasy. Small fry like me always get the worst of it." What I love about these two pieces is that it shows not only a city in chaos, but the citizens are clearly on both sides of the fence when it comes to their rulers. Next is the gang graffiti. As the city has slid into chaos, the gangs are gaining power. These are the Bottle Street Gang, so called because they've taken over a distillery and the surrounding street, but these are the only gang you actually meet in the first Dishonored. What I like is that although you only meet the Bottle Street Gang, there are references to the other gangs who are roaming the streets. And not only are the gangs writing on the walls to mark their territory, but they're also leaving messages to each other regarding gang-related business. Or idly insulting each other in gang hideouts, Slackjaw being the Bottle Street Gang's boss. There's also graffiti that deals with more general concerns. Dunwall has been walled off due to plague and supplies are clearly running low. So some pieces are concerned with simply the day-to-day needs of the people, and very occasionally you'll find graph that is purely focused on tiny moments of life. Most of the graph is words and sentences. However, there are a couple of pictorial images. This one is clearly political, and by the overspray around it, it's also clear that this one is supposed to be a stencil. There is this skull, by which its very nature seems to be a comment on death and thus the rat plague, and may well be a Memento Mori type warning. So Memento Mori is a Latin phrase that means remember your death or remember you're going to die, and it's been very popular in art throughout the ages. You can also find this crown on the walls, clearly a monarchy symbol. Occasionally the crown is placed on the aforementioned skull, a grim reminder that the Empress is dead. In fact, this is the first piece of graph you see in the entire game. It's sprayed to the left of the gateway on the image that becomes the menu screen, a portent of things to come. Then there is this mark. It's painted on buildings that have been struck by the plague. You can read it as a timer, but clearly the time has not run out or even started to. It could be a simple cross with the top filled in, but really I'm unsure of what this symbol might actually be. However, because it's an official symbol painted on the buildings by the City Watch, and it also appears on signs placed in front of buildings warning of plague and infection, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, as this video is focusing on what marks the citizens are making. And thus we come to my favourite piece of graph in the game, these crossed bones and dots. This is one of the first pieces of graph you see in the game, in Corvo's cell when the game starts, and it's the first of the graffiti that's repeated throughout the city.
So there's never any explanation as to what this symbol actually means. I've never seen a reference to it in any book or journal or letter that I've ever read in game. Snatches of conversation never mention it. And Dishonored is stuffed full of this kind of world building. So the only clue we have to the meaning of the symbol is in the symbol itself.
The crossed bones traditionally mean death. The crossed bones, usually topped by a skull, are often found on gravestones from the medieval times. and is also found on the Jolly Roger flag of pirates. So it could simply be read as death or death here, but then what of the dots? The careful placement of the dots suggests more than just death, and to me it feels like a sigil, a magic or superstitious sign to ward off the death and the plague. And this shows that the citizens feel that the main religion of the world, the Abbey of the Everyman, has failed them, and they're turning to other, older beliefs to try and save themselves.
And this brings me to the final theme of graffiti in Dishonored, which is the occult.
The main and only official religion of Dunwall is the Abbey of the Everyman, spread and enforced by overseers and headed by the High Overseer. The Abbey is focused in part on stamping out any other system of belief or form of witchcraft, mainly any worship of the heretical outsider, the observer in the void who gave Corvo his powers and delights in smugly taunting him. Despite all their efforts, worship of the outsider is rife within the populace, and this is reflected in the graffiti. I think this is partly because the Abbey's god is strongly missing from their scriptures and holy text, rarely if ever referred to, and certainly not spoken about to the citizens. However, the outsider is a much more approachable godlike figure. He appears to people in their dreams and has been worshipped for over 1,000 years, so the rituals are well embedded in the population's lives. Even in the Abbey of the Everyman's High Overseer yard, the Abbey's main HQ in Dunwall, there is rebellion and graffiti. Or is this a warning to other overseers about not succumbing to the lure of the outsider? There are a couple of places in the game that have little to no graffiti. One of these places is in the flooded district, where plague victims, known as weepers, are quarantined. Once they succumb to plague, they forget who they are and become zombies, clearly not interested in protesting on the walls. And if they've been rounded up and tossed into the flooded district before they've got the plague, I would surmise they're too busy trying not to become a weeper's next meal to write on the walls. But even here there are a few instances where desperate people have scrawled their messages.
In the real world, when a graffiti artist paints over another artist's work, it's called capping, and it's often considered disrespectful, especially if the quality of the newer work is lesser than the quality of the capped work.
In Dishonored, there are a number of instances of capped works. Here I feel that one citizen is capping the other because they feel their concern is more relevant or urgent than the first. However, because of the way the graphics work, it's impossible to tell who capped who. Did the political artist paint over the bones sigil, or were the bones painted after the sentence? This piece I noticed for the first time during the research playthrough. In this one boarded-up apartment block in the flooded district, there is a cursing of the outsider. Everywhere else, people speak of the outsider in hushed tones or not at all, but in this one corner of a room, next to a smaller room piled with the dead, someone has cursed the outsider. Even the more official works on the walls, advertisements pasted up around the city, aren't immune to the distress of those living with the plague. Alongside ads for boots, crematoriums and pubs, there are warnings about rats and what seems to be large posters cautioning of plague which have been torn off.
Dishonored works within a chaos system. This means that the more people you kill, the more rats, weepers and guards appear throughout the game. This makes the city a more dangerous place to be and the game a more difficult one to play. This high chaos system also affects young Emily's mental state and how the game ends. I'm not going to tell you how the game ends in case of the spoilers thing from before. Conversely, a low chaos game where you just asphyxiate people rather than kill them or you avoid them altogether means that there are less weepers and rats roaming the city and less guards patrolling the streets and buildings. It makes Dunwall a safer place to live, work and clamber over buildings. One of the things I wanted to do while researching this video, and by researching, replaying it again, just to photograph all the graffiti, was to see if the high-low chaos settings change the amount of graffiti in the game. So in the entertainment industry, lots of graffiti is often used as a really simple signifier for a dangerous place. And so the more graffiti there is, the more likely it's a perilous place you shouldn't enter.
In this loading screen, which explains the chaos system, you can clearly see the changes in the city from low to high chaos. In the high it does show graph, which doesn't appear in the low. However, on my playthrough I haven't seen any change in the graph levels. Playing Dishonored has given me a new way to look at the street art around me, to see past the pieces naming the artist, to see past the bright colours and abstract shapes, and to examine those works which talk about a specific problem, a specific cause. While we don't have plague sweeping through our streets, we do have a myriad of unresolved issues, from sexism, racism, homophobia and transphobia, issues arising from colonisation and unceded land, from a huge divide between rich and poor, between the powerful and the powerless. And if you look carefully, you can see it all being illustrated over and over again, down the alleys and on the walls of every city.
And each one shows what the citizens are concerned with and how the